So in Cottage Grove, there's a group of us that we call ourselves the Partners in History, and I just want to recognize who they are. It's the Cottage Grove Historical Museum, the Cottage Grove Genealogical Society, the Oregon Aviation Historical Society, the Cottage Grove Historical Society, Cottage Grove City Library, Bohemia Mining Museum, and Singing Creek. And if you're looking for a volunteer opportunity, check with one of the Partners in History. And FYI, the Cottage Grove Genealogical Society has a volunteer opportunity that you can actually do from home. So if you're interested in helping, but you don't really want to be out and about, we do, if you have a computer and you're fairly good at keyboarding, typing accuracy, we have a volunteer job you can do in your slippers, your jammies at home. So talking about the Historic Oregon Newspaper Project, the Woodard Family Foundation was very generous almost a year ago and donated enough funds to the Partners in History that we're going to be able to digitize another 27 years of newspapers. And we were hoping they'd be done by the end of this year, but we just found out from Elizabeth last Friday that it might be into 2025 before they're done, but it will take us up to February 28th, 1957. And for us researchers, that is amazing. And so I'm very excited about that, and you all should be too, because that is a free database. And if you want to learn how to use it, you could check with the Partners in History. The Genealogical Society would be happy to help you. We're in the community center, and thank you so much. So tonight we have Gerald Santana. Yay, Gerald. And Gerald is originally from Los Angeles, where he studied media production and fashion merchandising. Gerald worked in Hollywood as a film and TV extra and moved to the Bay Area in 2001. There he lived in San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley, and became a musician, a film archivist, and a parent. Congratulations. In February 2018, he relocated with his family to Cottage Grove, where they were lucky to buy and remodel the oldest residence in town, built in 1874. The Lurch House on Adams Street, or Adams Avenue. In October of 2018, he began working for the Cottage Grove Sentinel as a sales rep to meet local business owners, help facilitate routes, and make connections and immerse himself in our city's culture. He became editor of the paper in 2022. Gerald is currently serving as the president of the Cottage Grove Lions Club and the Cottage Grove Mural Committee. Thank you, Gerald, for all your service to Cottage Grove. Yeah. And I want to say one more thing. If you haven't gotten the new 2024 Visitor and Newcomers Guide to Cottage Grove, you need to pick one up at a local business or the chamber office. It's really cool. It's then and now.
Again, thanks to Bart, Seth, and the Axe and Fiddle. We also want to thank Brandon McManus, Holly Turpin and the Cottage Grove Historical Society, the Cottage Grove Museum, Dana Merriday, Deborah and Rick at the Genealogical Society, Downtown Cottage Grove, like Debbie mentioned, the University of Oregon and their newspaper archive, the Library of Congress. We have Lane County History Museum, Oregon Coast Beach Connection, Henry Ford Museum, Sarah Laskow at Atlas Obscura, and the North Lincoln County Historical Museum. Thank you to all of these individuals and establishments for providing a lot of the research material here that we have today for Tourist Welcome. Let's get right into it, shall we? So tourism in Oregon, the Oregon coast really began about 30 years after the arrival of settlers in covered wagons with travel by rail connecting the valley to the rest of the state starting in the 1870s. Lodging started in a rugged and adventurous style as the early land claims started to fill up. Virtually every dwelling at first was a basic tent where you were left to the discretion of rough weather conditions and makeshift toilets. Eventually, the development of tourist lodging on the Oregon coast fascinated many travelers clamoring for a taste of the great outdoors, from tent villages with modest accommodations, of course. But tourism on the North Oregon coast really started around 1880 when trains began to arrive at Seaside from Portland. The Seaside House was the first hotel constructed on the coast and built in 1871 by a railroad tycoon named Ben Holiday. And that's where the town received its name. It's not at all because of its proximity to the ocean, it's because of the hotel. It was a luxury resort with a racetrack. That wasn't affordable for a lot of the average people out here, who instead lived in simple tents near the shore. Coastal towns then formed larger tent cities and later began to add hotels around 1900, including Newport. A couple more in Seaside and Tillamook County, which began to see the development of inns and other amenities. Still, most pioneer travelers who considered themselves auto nomads, continued to use tents throughout the early part of the century. As a result, auto tourism was limited to the summer months. Then, when the Ford Model T was introduced to the general public in 1908, automobiles became available to the majority of Americans, and the auto camping craze became a national pastime, and more or less a sport as well. The Model T was dubbed the Tin Lizzie, and it featured a 4-cylinder motor, magneto ignition, and a planetary transmission. It was a technologically advanced design and an affordable mode of transportation for the public. Together with the expanding Pacific Highway, travel opened up in Oregon with its legendary salmon fishing to sportsmen all over the world. The Lizzie and the Pacific Highway came into operation in the 1910s, seemingly feeding off of one another. Tourism had grown into a viable industry by 1910. Bay Ocean on the Tillamook Spit, the resort town, demonstrated this. Are any of you aware of Bay Ocean? Yeah. Miles of roads were paved, and over 100 properties were sold by the shore. The village had a variety of amenities to draw tourists, including a pier, an arcade, a store, and a hotel. By 1914, a story in the Statesman Journal estimated approximately 100,000 visitors were expected that particular year to the Tillamook coast. Bay Ocean completely disappeared into the sea by 1930. It's now known as a lost resort town. The first official city-run auto camp, however, was established in Douglas, Arizona in 1913, the year that vehicle ownership in America crossed over 1 million. The Oregon Highway Department, ODOT's predecessor, was also first created in 1913 as well under the slogan, "Get Oregon out of the mud." The state did not yet have any oiled or paved roads before the Pacific Highway was completed. In southwestern Oregon, there were several land transportation systems and routes, from Indian trails to pioneer trails and wagon roads following water courses. However, during the automobile era, dirt roads became granite roads, and they narrowed paved roads for cars, just like the one you're seeing up there. The Pacific Highway was a key 1,500-mile north to south transportation corridor. It extended from Vancouver, Washington in the north to San Diego, California in the south. By the mid-1910s, utilizing the highway, developing cities like Ashland, Medford, and Grants Pass competed for the tourist trade by offering free auto camps, while camps in bigger California cities like San Diego experimented with both wooded and urban terrain, like camping on rooftops, for instance. There were over 1 million registered automobiles by 1913, but by 1923 there were approximately 15 million autos in the United States alone during the height of the auto camp fad. Between real resort hotels and tent cities by the beach, auto camps were a short but interesting trend in lodging, which took on various forms as autos evolved. Tents were either affixed to your car or used as standalone buildings. Wild, huh? One type of platform had a tent position on top of it. In contrast, the smaller but more robust platform construction known as a cabin could have a roof or top that resembled a tent. As automobile ownership increased, travel became a popular pastime. People would simply load up camping gear into their automobiles and just hit the road. These tin can tourists saw themselves as pioneers. There were slurs put out by the media. They were called auto gypsies as well. At first, there was a certain freedom in car camping. There were no bookings required. You can stop at any place. You can dress as you pleased. And it was fairly inexpensive. The practical benefit was that if your car broke down overnight, you could just easily repair it. When the Standard Oil Company was granted a permit to establish a plant here in Cottage Grove in 1916, the city paved its streets. Then in 1918, city traffic ordinances were strictly enforced at that point. Not that the oil companies had anything to do with it. In May 1918, the edition of the Cottage Grove Sentinel, in that particular edition, the commercial club, local service club here in town, is reported to have held a meeting to designate a location for the very first city auto camp. Some residents complained that the camp would be thrown open to gypsies and all comers. Yep. But the Sentinel editor noted that gypsies were never permitted to remain within the city overnight at all anyway. And no vehicles other than automobiles could be permitted on the auto campgrounds. Weeding out the homeless, of course. A year later, cleanup day for the city park was selected in May 1919, while the plan for the first auto camp still awaited a decision from the city. But by June, the first auto camp was ready to be used after considerable work and expense was made to the south end of the city park, known today as Coiner Park, which had a gravel roadway and entrance into the camp on Washington Street. Water, fuel, a camp stove, and firewood were offered free when the camp opened. Supplies were sold at stores, and large signs were placed on Highway 99 to direct traffic into the incoming city park. The camp's popularity gained momentum with the support of the community. The following year, the city auto camp was made ready again with another park day. Downtown merchants took the day off at noon, cleaned up the campgrounds, and signs were put up around the city and down Highway 99, attracting tourists to the camp. With Cottage Grove's hospitality and its natural attractions, it quickly became a favorite site for any traveler. Eugene and Portland opened their own auto camps as well. Here's a shot of the Eugene auto camp. It looks like Amazon Park. In 1921, the city added a 25-cent fee to every car that came into the city camp. With up to 40 cars per night through the month of September, over 2,000 cars were reported to have stayed throughout the summer season, with an average family estimated in spending approximately $6 per day in town, purchasing gasoline, clothes, food, and repairs. That's the equivalent of about $100 today. Eugene and Portland followed suit that year and began charging an entry fee into some of their own best camps as well. Here's shot of one of Portland's. By the summer of 1922, the city auto camp opened again for the season, this time 50 cents per car and 20 cents each additional day. Roads were re-graveled, and it was reported to be one of the best auto camps in the state, if not the entire West Coast, only surpassed by the auto camp in Dayton, Washington, which had a concrete swimming pool. Yeah, not bad, huh? Over 3,600 people were reported to have spent the night at the Cottage Grove Auto Camp by October 1922, with reports of carloads of as many as 10 people crammed inside of a Buick, to a single person arriving on a bicycle all the way from New York. They had auto camps out there too, and all across the state. Travelers found a home in Cottage Grove, and they became residents. Tourists became locals. If travelers couldn't find a home to buy or rent, they just lived at the auto camp. Between 1923 to around 1934, attention began to turn to the auto camp cabin. Proprietors of auto camps realized that cabins with a few amenities attracted paying patrons. Soon more than 3/4 of the Pacific auto camps contained cabins. There were 714 auto camps in the Pacific Northwest by 1929. By July 1923, the city's auto camp was favorably advertised by tourists across the country. Due to its location, its cleanliness, and convenience, it was a stopover pinned to many maps as it gained in popularity. An average of 1,000 daily tourists were reported to arrive by August that year. If they couldn't find a place at the city park, they'd just pull over by the side of the highway and sleep there. A total of over 6,000 people registered at the city auto camp that season. The city reported $18,000 in revenue, equivalent to about $324,000 today. Not bad. Not bad. In November 1923, C.R. Woodson, father of the Woodson brothers who owned a car dealership here on Main Street, right over on Main and 99, arrived from Texas and purchased a tract north of town near the present site of the Western Oregon Exposition. And he also purchased Albert Woodard's residence on 9th Street, which he converted into an auto camp. Its design was meant to be more convenient to tourists. Gasoline was available in several locations, and by then service stations and auto camps soon began to merge. By 1924, Anloff built an auto camp, and soon Roy Riggs planned to open another auto camp in Cottage Grove on the Pacific Highway as well at his orchard, giving the city 3 camps. In February 1925, however, a petition was brought to the city by the recently formed Lions Club and the Keepers of a Den, a civic organization for women at the time. They brought it to the council to discontinue the city park's use as an auto camp. The petition was granted, and it was later turned into a playground. The city park signs were ordered to be torn down immediately, as a number of autos began to arrive and set up tents before the campground would normally have opened anyway. They were normally opening by the end of spring, and folks were already arriving by the end of January, setting up shop. Here's something. It was reported on April 13th, nothing in Cottage Grove comes into town without some bad news kind of tied to it sometimes. It was reported on April 13, 1925, that Fred Slater, age 23 from Chehalis, Washington, was taken into custody from the Woodson Auto Camp on a charge of white slavery and served 4 months in jail, a lesser charge than contributing to the delinquency of minors, 2 girls who were paroled from reform school. A suspicious Woodson alerted Sheriff Pitcher. It was said to be the first time that a Lane County judge imposed such a sentence for a criminal offense that occurred at an auto camp. On July 13, 1925, it was reported that the wife of George Schaefer died at the Eugene Hospital after undergoing a gallbladder operation, and she'd been staying at the Woodson Auto Camp with her husband, where they were making their home there. But despite some unfortunate publicity, by August 1925, the Woodson Camp was host to over 2,000 patrons in 571 cars, and was known as a favorable camp with comfortable accommodations, as 10 18 by 22 cabins were added to the tract. A community kitchen, shower, and baths would be provided the following season, along with extra cabins with a garage and open camp covers scenically built near the Coast Fork River. The following year, the Woodson Camp was boasted as one of the best camps on the coast, period. And by the end of the 1926 season, the city accounted for nearly 20,000 visitors at local camps, the biggest year. While the film crew of Buster Keaton's The General filmed at nearby locations that summer, it was common for folks from their company to entertain at the auto camps when family visited. Some would stay at local hotels, others would stay at the local camps. Everybody got a show. In April 1927, the Golden Rule Auto Camp and Service Station opened at the south of city limits by J.B. Argabright and a partner named Mr. Decker. Couldn't find his first name. It was considered modern. The auto camp was equipped with shower baths, hot and cold water, electric lights, a community kitchen, a 2-room cabin with garage. Yeah. It also had a store and a service station, which was operated in connection with the camp. And for anybody who might want to see an original print of that, I have one up here that you guys can take a look at, provided by Debbie Monson.
That was on 99?
That was on 99, a little bit further down than 5th Street. So around where they're doing construction now, by the motel, around there. Although the Woodson Camp was rated Class A by inspectors, the highest rating of any local camp, the Golden Rule Auto Camp, began advertising its location and services in their auto shop simply with just 2 words. Look at that: satisfaction guaranteed. And only 5 months after opening, it was sold to Frank Heck, who alerted the public in a classified ad that he would no longer be responsible for any of Argabright's bills after September 23, while Argabright would not be responsible for any bills made by Heck after the same day. What the heck, exactly. In October 1927, the Sentinel published a report of an elderly transient man named Charles Tubbs. Again, back to nothing ever opens without some bad publicity. Charles Tubbs was charged with a statutory offense at the Golden Rule with a 13-year-old girl. It was revealed that Tubbs, who drove a car with Arizona plates, picked up the minor with her 9-year-old brother after running away in Canby and eventually reaching Cottage Grove. Police Pitcher saw them arrive that evening but assumed the children were related to Tubbs. Other campers overheard conversations at bedtime which made them suspicious. The children made no outcry. It was reported, but the incident was reported to the police in the morning. However, when they arrived, Tubbs and the children were long gone. Authorities, however, communicated with Medford police, where they had a hunch they were traveling, where Tubbs was apprehended, and the children eventually released back to their father. In November 1927, the USPS, their carriers began services to the Woodson Auto Camp, and a lateral sewer district was created on the south end of 5th Street to include and serve the Union Oil Company, the Halliwell and Nelson service station, the Fullerton service station, and the Golden Rule Auto Camp. Over 1,000 camps were known to be in operation for the year 1927 or about to open. According to a list by the Associated Oil Company, the growth and magnitude of auto travel was recorded by the U.S. Forest Services, which showed over 6 million registrations made in 1926 of people either entering or leaving national forest in California alone, up 800% in 10 years since the opening of the very first auto camps. In the summer of 1928, the Associated Oil Company and the Automobile Club of Southern California distributed new pocket-sized booklets to include over 1,000 auto camps on the Pacific coast with detailed road maps and hunting and fishing information. The booklets listed facilities which spanned from the Mexican to the Canadian border. Henry Ford and Thomas Edison took annual camping trips from 1916 to 1924 with an entourage of as many as 50 cars. One was solely used as a refrigerator. And here he is in 1921 stopping in Maryland to take a picture with then President Harding. And there's Edison on the left, Ford on the right with the bow tie. By the end of the 1928 camping season, the Woodson Auto Camp received a feature story in the Sentinel, recognized again as one of the best on the Pacific Coast. They added a new building in 1929, a community house that was built for $1,500 with up-to-date laundry and a recreation center. Over 10 million individuals were attempting life on the road by the end of the 1920s, and there were thousands of auto camps throughout the country, with some estimates ranging between 3,000 to 6,000. The 1930s brought yet another stage in Oregon coast lodging. Auto camps were now building little cabin structures instead of tents, giving way to the era of the motor lodge, with the likes of the Village Green, for instance, which opened here in Cottage Grove in 1960. I had planned to talk a little bit more about the Village Green, but there is a little relic that I'd like to show you. Is Seth here? Yes, he is. Seth, can you come up here, please?
Ready? You go.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That is the original sign. So I'll tell you this. The very last story that I wrote for the Sentinel was about this sign. It was found inside of an old barn. Brandon McManus, posted a picture to social media of a curious sign he noticed on the property he purchased in 2020 with his family near Walker. He said the sign was being used as a hay door in his barn. He crowdsourced a Facebook group for details, wondering about the sign's origins. Not surprised if it was a stage prop, he guessed. Well, my history senses started tingling, and I immediately started to research this thing, and I found that it's an incredible relic from 1919. It's hand painted on Z-brace boards. The sign reads, "Free Auto Camp in City Park, Cottage Grove, 8 acres of trees, pure mountain water," from London Springs, of course, large camp stove, free wood, and underneath written bold lettering on top of a shabby white flaky background there, covered in dust, says, "Tourists welcome." McManus here found a very, very rare example of transportation folk art from 1919, back when the city first opened its first auto camp at the southern end of the city park. The sign is an artifact from the first camp, which was likely posted along Highway 99 around 1919 near his home. McManus also recently sent me a picture of a wall near a makeshift bathroom that was left unfinished. Boards used for the framing read Graber Getty, Cottage Grove, Oregon. When he sent me the picture, I thought perhaps it was the owner of the house. I did some detail, and Graber Getty was the name of a hardware store. It eventually changed its name to Graber Getty. It was first known as Knowles and Graber. And that hardware store was used to furnish the materials that were likely purchased for the addition of the house. However, they dated later than the original construction of the barn. But McManus's home was built in 1920. The barn is of the same time frame as the city's first auto camp, and we both can gather, I think we can all gather, that it was likely used as a hay door from day one. Based on the pictures that were taken where it hangs, the old 4x5 sign here is sized exactly and affixed to the hay door in his family's barn. The old sign was likely taken from the side of the road during construction of the barn in 1920, where it was fitted, and stayed preserved there for 100 years. Here it is. It's all original. Yeah, going back to the dark spot, that's why I put a little highlight on this, because I call it the smudge, because I can't really.
They messed up.
I think they messed up and they painted the O on top of the smudge, from what I can see. So they didn't really intend to use it for maybe more than a season or two. So as we know, after the third season, the city ordered all of these signs to be taken down. And it was likely taken down in 1920 when it was put on the barn, on the hay door, put on as a hay door on his barn, since it's sized perfectly. But since the city started charging 25 cents per car, we couldn't have these signs out there, otherwise it's false advertising. But here you have it. This is the reason why we're all here today, because Brandon posted this picture to Facebook, and I loved it immediately, and I wanted to know more about his history, and now we know a little bit more today. Does anybody have any questions? Well, that's all we have here for today. Glad you could make it all to another fun history pub. You're welcome. Yes, sir. Jim asked if any of the historical or the partners in history know about the sign. Well, Holly knows about the sign at the Historical Society.
No one knew about it until he posted it on social media, right?
Oh, yes. You mean before the fact? No. It was basically preserved there for 100 years because, I mean, we're coming up on, the anniversary of this sign being made, but it was largely unnoticed until perhaps Brandon started working on the house. I invited him here today so that he can maybe answer a few questions, but it was left there until they purchased the house, and they thought it was probably a stage prop from the general or something. I have no clue maybe what his thought process was, but it is a real deal. And it's likely the only relic from the very first year of the auto camps as well, because we don't have signage from the camp at the site. We don't have pictures of the camp itself from 1919 unless we dig deeply into the archive of the town's history and maybe find something. There's no picture of it in any of the newspapers, so this is the last remaining relic we have of that period. Yes?
I find it interesting that the early days had this
idea of the gypsy campers being bad, and yet today we now have people living in their vehicles is also being viewed as bad.
Yes, so something, what was it that they call those folks? All-comers. So all-comers, I'm not really sure what the phrase means, but we know that gypsy is a slur at this point. So travelers who were wandering, some people would call them vagrants, okay, have always been dismissed by the general public. And so it is interesting that we've reached this moment in history where we're reflecting on the origin of how our town got started by introducing folks to Cottage Grove with transportation, and a lot of these folks were basically living in their cars, pitching tents wherever they could. Sound familiar? But today we might see them a little bit differently unless they're traveling in cars that have a little expense tied to them. Yes, sir.
What was the main attraction of bringing all these people to Cottage Grove? Was it just going up the coast highway?
Yes, well, yeah, the Pacific Highway essentially was the blueprint for how to travel. So some folks would travel up the Pacific Coast Highway in the earlier days, and as the Pacific Highway was built from 1913 to 1926, it introduced an era of auto camping where folks were using this stretch from California all the way up to, and so that was the draw, that you can see the West Coast for gas money.
Also, I want to interject here. There were no motels. People weren't that mobile. So this was a way for you to be able to travel in your car and stop where you wanted to.
Yeah, that's why I put up this little picture here at the end where it kind of shows a transition from sort of what we were expecting before and what motor lodges turned into much later down the line. I wanted to put up more pictures of the Village Green and actually go into Village Green history, but there's not enough time. Yes, sir.
How fast were these cars at this time?
Oh, between 40 and 70 miles an hour.
Wow.
70 when you're really pushing it and going downhill. Yeah. They're averaging 40 miles an hour. Any other? Yes, sir. The Bay Ocean town, I would recommend just look up Bay Ocean, and there's probably more details in there that I can even conclude right now to tell you. It disappeared into the ocean because they built it on the Tillamook Spit. So as the ocean crept into the coast, it wiped out essentially all of those folks that were camping there, and anybody who bought properties on there as well, they were all wiped out. Anybody else? Yeah, that's a really good question. So how often did tourists stop? Tourists would stop whenever they pleased. At this point, it was essentially like a sport. So folks would get into their vehicles and drive wherever they saw an interesting spot and then just pull over and camp. That was the earliest auto camping that was recorded. Then as the 10 cities started to form around the coast, folks were drawn to the shore, to the coastline, because the Pacific Highway was not yet built. And then once that kind of came into play, then there were, by that point, well over 100 just on a very small stretch of highway. And all of the auto camps varied in nastiness. They really did. And so the Cottage Grove one, the reason why folks really wanted to come here was because it was clean. They eventually put in a bathroom. They gave away basically all of the provisions that you need to keep warm and dry. All the amenities provided there. Essentially, you would bring in your car and then they let you stay. With that said, there were not too many towns that had nearby gasoline stations, bathrooms, a place for you to buy food if perhaps you didn't have anything. So Cottage Grove was a real draw for folks. I mean, look at it now. It's a beautiful place to showcase natural places that we have here, and people didn't want to leave. And so it was very common for folks to return to Cottage Grove once a year as well on their camping trips. Anybody else? Yes. That is a good point. Yeah. So I was going to put in Village Green stuff, and that in between was the building of the I-5. And so essentially, the Woodard family who sold to Woodson, who then put in an auto camp, they also purchased property where the Village Green is as well, and they built up that particular tract as well. And they were very savvy folks because they knew that the I-5 was coming in, so they started that process before the I-5 was even completed. They understood the value in travel from the auto camp craze, but then understood too that as progress was being made with tourism alone, not everybody really had the money to stay at a nice location, and summer travel was not really a thing until the late 60s, early 70s anyway. The train came to Cottage Grove in 1872. So yes, and folks were coming in, 1,400 folks were coming in here daily when the train first arrived. Wow. Yeah, and it was, half of Cottage Grove didn't recognize the other half. It happened that fast. The train was originally supposed to be on the river. I'll tell you more about this history another time, but it was Robert Veach, who was a senator at the time, who decided that he didn't want to spend $50,000 to put the train on the river. It would be too expensive near their property. So they decided to build it out this way where there were only farmers and not much else, right? So once construction came in, they built it on the other side of the town, and it irritated everybody. Nobody really wanted it there, but that's where it ended up. Yes?
How much work was available for anybody who wanted to work or could work?
You know, I think work was probably available as much as there were homes, where there was some work available, but not much, kind of like the way that it is today. I don't think we've moved very far from those times. Yeah, we're looking for prosperity somewhere, and you fall in love with a natural place like this, and then the more your heart becomes attracted to it, the harder it is for you to find roots. It's kind of the way it is sometimes.
There was still mining and logging going on.
Yeah, mining and logging was still going on. There were different periods of mining and logging. It would build up. I think in the 1920s there was a final push for some mining.
Yes.
And there's still some. There were resurgences. So after 1860 it died off. 1870s it was brought up a little again, and then it died off again. It came back during the 1890s. That's when it really started real strong. Anybody else?
I want to share a
Yes.
personal thing. My grandparents left Kansas during the Dust Bowl, come to California, but they were, during the Depression, Dust Bowl years, and they were too late for a good job. So they started being what is now termed as fruit tramps. And they would go from Southern California clear to Hood River every year, but they would stop in Cottage Grove. And so when they finally decided that they were tired of this life, they ended up staying in Cottage Grove, but they stayed in an auto camp near Sweet Lane.
Oh, really?
Yes. And then in 1943, when my other side of the family come to Cottage Grove, they stayed at this one, and this says 1/4 mile north of the city limits, but this is before you cross the river.
Where is it?
North on 99.
Where is that one? I have that one here somewhere. Oh, there it is.
Yes.
Is that it? Yeah.
And what's so cool is they stayed here for a week, and they were able to buy a ranch in Lorraine. My mother's parents settled in Lorraine as well, and that's how my parents met in 1948. They married in August of 48, and here I am.
Fantastic. I was wondering if maybe we can bring somebody in who had some history with auto camps and maybe was still here.
Well,
You're in front of me.
I did not know this
Yes.
until I shared this. Katie Vaughn shared this on Facebook,
Mhm.
and I reshared it. This is my personal copy of this card. This is an original that's never been posted.
Oh,
But
fantastic.
she shared one that
Mhm.
you have here that's been posted. You can see where it went through the
Mhm.
postal thing. And so my aunt sent me a message and said, "Did you know we stayed in that for a week before my grandparents bought a place and they bought a ranch in Lorraine?"
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
Serendipitous.
Yeah, amazing. You're welcome. Thank you. So that's the end of our program today. Would you like to do some trivia, Debbie?